Hello and welcome to the Schola Progenium. Today I've got a very exciting video for you because I'm going to go over the different things that have sprung to mind at first glance over the announcement for the 9th edition of Warhammer 40,000 from a Blood Angels perspective. Now, I just want to say first of all, it's been a while since I've posted, over 2 months, and I just want to apologise to the people, my regular viewers, for the lack of content. There's no real excuse for this, but I'll just very briefly explain the reason, which is that unfortunately, due to the lockdown, I've actually not been staying at my own apartment, but at my girlfriend's apartment, where I haven't got the resources to record videos. However, yesterday, I did the round trip to my own apartment, picked up the stuff that I needed, because obviously, as you can imagine, it's been really weighing on me and in the back of my mind that I need to get some videos out, and I've been desperate to get some Warhammer 40K content out there for you guys. And then lo and behold, the Emperor protects. Sanguinius smiles down on us, because what happens the next day? But 9th edition is announced by Games Workshop. And I haven't been because I'm a key worker, I've been working full time, so I haven't really been keeping up with Warhammer community or anything like that really at the moment. So if this had been announced previously, it was a surprise to me. The boys that I play regularly with on our group chat on WhatsApp, sort of it kicked off. Everyone was like, tune into Warhammer community, you've got to watch this. And, so I did, grab my pen and paper, and I've written down a few things for you guys to think about. So, couldn't be better timing. I'm absolutely thrilled. So without much further ado, let's get stuck in. Now, the first thing that I want to do is obviously explain, because it's been a while, how and for new viewers potentially, how I usually break these videos down. And what I'll do is I will go through the sort of key points that I took away from the gameplay side of the announcement, because obviously they announced lots of different stuff, very exciting. From a gameplay perspective, the key points. And then I'm going to go through sort of the pros and cons of each of those points for you guys in a little more detail. And overall, how I think those points weigh up for Blood Angels. Are they overall a good thing or a bad thing, or really good or terrible? Now, the first thing that I really took away was command points, big change to command points. And you're going to get more points for being a purist, which is just fantastic for us. That's just, you can't really say much more about it. If you're a Blood Angels player through and through, and you like to take pure Blood Angels and through the highs and the lows of 8th edition, 7th edition, 6th edition, or previous editions, however long you've been collecting, Blood Angels have been up, we've been down, sometimes we've been usable just in a small detachment, by certain players have dipped into Blood Angels, and maybe you've dipped into Blood Angels and now you're thinking, I want to expand my force. But whatever your reason for collecting Blood Angels, if you're a purist, this can only be good news. What it sounds like is that you're going to actually have to pay. You're going to start with a potential CP bank, so to speak, depending on the points level, I would presume. And then you're going to actually pay for separate detachments out of this CP bank. So the more detachments you've got, the less CP you're going to start with at the beginning of the game. Now that's great for us because, obviously we don't know what the force organization chart is going to look like, whether there's going to be drastic changes to that. But ultimately, as a generally purist force, when we can pour all our points into our Blood Angels chapter, we just take 2,000 points, all our Death Company, Sanguinary Guard, all of that kind of thing. There's plenty for us to play with in a purist force, so ultimately this can only be a good thing for us. And we're just going to be firing on all cylinders with their CP going exactly where they're needed and not into detachments that we don't need. Now, the next big thing, all in all, just a good thing, no real negatives to that. All in all, from the next big point that I wanted to look at was firing from combat with tanks. Now, I took away from this that you couldn't fire into combat with tanks. So if there's 2 units of infantry fighting, I don't believe you'll be able to pop a shot into that combat with your tank. It's kind of been a tenet of Games Workshop throughout all of Warhammer Fantasy and 40k that, you can't really shoot into a combat that's going on. There's just not cricket. I don't know if that's because it's, a British game, and from a British perspective, that's just not good sportsmanship, but tanks and firing weapons, catapults in Warhammer Fantasy, through the ages of Games Workshop, I've just not been able to do that. And I apart from potentially Skaven, and that was an actual quirk of the Skaven army. It's one of their selling points. Is, you can shoot into combats that have got your units, and do damage to both sides. I just don't think that's going to be the case. Well, I think it'll be the case that you can no longer really tie up a tank and stop it from firing off some or all of its guns. Now, again, we don't know the details here, but I imagine there'll be some kind of targeting restrictions, like you can only shoot the target that you're engaged with, or you can only shoot the target that you're not engaged with, sort of over the top of the men as they scramble around the vehicle. There's going to be something going on there, and we don't really know. What we do know is, overall, this is probably a negative for Blood Angels. We, have tanks, and having a boost to tanks is going to be good, because I don't know about you guys, but I've really struggled to get any real use out of tanks, for the last half of 8th edition. So having a boon to tanks in general, that's going to help. But we're more often going to be locking up tanks than we will being locked up with our tanks. And I'm going to go into that more detail in a sec, because there are caveats to that. But essentially, that's not great for us. A great tactic against Imperial Guard, for example, is, just tying them up with some Leman Russ with some tactical marines or assault marines, or just something really, really cheap, because you're essentially locking up that tank for the game. It won't pull out, it won't be able to shoot, it's not going to be able to escape, you'll catch up to it, lock it up again, and it's going to need support from something else to get it out of that situation. And we won't be able to do that anymore from the sounds of things, or we won't be able to totally negate tanks. But as a Blood Angel specifically, and not just a combat army, I think we will come out on top of this change in regards to combat armies, because a lot of our combat units are in and destroy something in one wallop, and we're less about having a horde and running in and tying stuff up. So if you were, say, Genestealer Cult or something like that, and you're coming out of the shadows, I can't remember what the specific rule is, and tying up vehicles to make sure that your combat units aren't getting shot at and that kind of thing, your valuable units not getting destroyed by enemy heavy support. Or if you're a lighter Orc or Tyranid force, where you really rely on tying up tanks to protect yourself, that's going to be worse than for us, where if we're attacking a tank, it's generally because we want to destroy that tank, and we're going to hit it with some Thunderhammers or Power Fist or something like that, or just massive amounts of jacked up Blood Angels attacks on plus wounds. You've done it 1,000 times before, you know how we do this. So I think it's going to be overall a negative for Blood Angels, this rules change, and when we find out more about it. But I don't think it's going to be too much of a negative from our perspective. Now, the next thing this kind of brings me on to, there are talk about terrain. I'll go on to that in a second. But what really I found interesting, the next point that I would want to skip to, not in the order that Games Workshop released it, was the idea of reserves, and the fact that tactical reserves will be able to come on in a different way. And they were very specific in saying that it'd be able to come in from the flanks, and in my eyes it was clear that you might even be able to come on from your opponent's table edge. Now, that's where the previous point about tanks being locked up and not being able to fire could actually swing drastically in our favour, because we have Baal Predators. Now, anyone who played with the 5th edition Blood Angels Codex will remember the golden age of outflanking with Baal Predators. Now, this was a time when vehicles had different armour ratings on their rear armour and that kind of thing. And coming in on the sort of back edge in your opponent's deployment zone, but on a flank, and shooting into the rear armour of a tank, and you couldn't shoot and tank shock, or tank shocking into a small unit of infantry, and just forcing that leadership check and forcing them off the back edge of the board, which was a really cool and clever tactic that Blood Angels could deploy. And I used it so many times in tournaments when the 5th edition Codex came out, because it was just so cool, and it just took people by surprise all the time. Now, if we can do that again, obviously there won't be armour facing values, as they've not mentioned anything to do with that. But if we can bring Baals on in nasty positions and develop new tactics with these Baals, where we can bring them on the side and then hit enemy units from vulnerable places, then the fact that they can't be tied up by backline units and they can just keep shooting just makes them all the more deadly. And with that perspective, the idea of not being able to tie up a tank and stop it shooting, actually could be, for us, overall a boon and a benefit, because, as I said once again, we'll get in there and destroy enemy tanks, But when we bring in a Baal on the backfield, or a pair of Baals hunting on the backfield from a flank, and start strafing into backline infantry, taking enemy off their what they thought was secure objectives, you know, they won't be able to countercharge and tie up those tanks before the infantry squad's wiped out. So just that sounds really good, and something I'm really, really excited about. But again, I don't want to get ahead of myself because we don't fully know how these rules will work. But this is just a video of what's happened in terms of the creative juices flowing in my brain and what I was getting excited about in terms of ideas as we were, you know, I'm sure all collectively watching that live stream released by Games Workshop on Twitch. Now, the next thing that I'll look at is terrain changes. Now, terrain changes, they were quite, they played the cards quite close to their chest, but it was quite interesting to know that the guy from Nova who organises that massive tournament has been heavily involved in the playtesting. So I think we can presume that the way they've run their terrain and the way they've experimented with rules in terms of that tournament and that whole meta and scene and tournaments related and linked to that, and just that kind of those minor changes are probably going to be something that has been dipped into and is going to have coloured and flavoured the terrain changes. You know, it probably won't be anything like those rules, so there's no point even really trying to break them down in detail and analyse how they'd affect the Blood Angels. But we know that's probably a jumping off point or a fair baseline. It's going to be something that's seasoned the outcome, so to speak. And we can't really know what's going to go on with terrain, but in the same sort of sentence almost in the same breath, you could say, one of the game developers mentioned that, you know, again, if it hadn't been made clear earlier, they were trying to improve troops who were combat troops' chances of getting into combat effectively. So with that in mind, without knowing any of the details, I think we can safely say as a, you know, combat army with loads of combat infantry troops, changes are going to be beneficial to us and help us get where we need to be to engage the enemy and tear them limb from limb. It's also nice to see the fact that they're putting chainswords on Primaris Marines. Now, this is kind of a double-edged sword or a bittersweet pill to swallow, because the fact that they're bringing out chainsword-wielding Primaris, sort of assault Marines, assault intercessors they've called them, and the fact that we have now Death Company Primaris, I don't know about you, but for me, Death Company Primaris, Death Company intercessors haven't massively blown me away. You know, I've proxied them a couple of times in a couple of skirmishes, and, you know, they're cool, but they're not sort of game-changing, and it's not tempted me away from my normal Death Company models in the old Marine scale. Now, what I think, sort of, on the negative side, if you are an old Marine player and like using old Marines, or you're heavily invested, you know, you've already got a big force and collection of, you know, Death Company, maybe got 20 or so Death Companies, such as myself, this looks like the final stepping stone before we move away from standard old Marines entirely, because really the only obstacle that Games Workshop has to overcome currently is all the specialist Marine models for all the individual chapters. Space Wolves individual specialist units, you know, Death Company and Sanguinary Guard. From our own perspective, you know, they are old Marine chassis with, you know, bells and whistles tagged on, the Death Company and the Sanguinary Guard, but they are essentially, you know, even though Sanguinary Guard, yes, they're artificer armor, they are old Marines. And I think moving towards close combat intercessors is sort of that final stepping stone before they then start bringing out Intercessor, Sanguinary Guard and Death Company in the next wave. So, you know, it may be that we all have to invest a little bit of cash in revamping our specialist units in the coming years. I don't think it's right on our doorstep, but I think this is, you know, this is another sign that this is an inevitable step in that direction. But I don't think it's one we can massively complain about, because we've had plenty of time to enjoy our old toys and plenty of time to think about what we'd do and where we'd go. And, you know, I, for one, have many 40k armies. I love my Blood Angels and they'll always be my first choice. And, you know, they're my army that I like wearing a comfy pair of pants. You know, I can just play with those guys. You know, I've played with them 1,000 times and, you know, I know how to use my Blood Angels very capably. So, you know, it's one of those where it's interesting for me because I just have to look at the silver lining and go, well, now is the time to fully invest in Primaris. It's something I've dragged my heels on. I've only got battalion of intercessors, but, you know, we're heading there, may as well, you know, hop on the train and carry on, you know, with the meta. It's, you know, it's just happening, and we may as well get used to it. But on the other side, you know, it's nice to see chainswords supported, and, you know, if they're going to be bringing out those chainsword units, and, you know, making intercessor close combat units a more focal part of 9th edition, then they are almost definitely going to want to support that by making them effective. And one of the best ways to make them effective without just breaking the unit itself is to, you know, change terrain. And that's obviously what they're going to be doing. And I think overall these terrain changes are going to be tailored towards, hopefully, the combat side of things. So it's not going to be as all about hiding in terrain with your shooting units necessarily. I think it's going to be about using terrain. Maybe there'll be different movement values, that kind of thing. Who knows? Maybe they did say that they perhaps felt they'd streamlined the terrain side of things too much in the overall streamlining of 8th edition. So it may be that there are some negatives, there are some balances to that, as well as a new tactical level to that, where if you play it right, the terrain can massively be a favour to your combat units. But, you know, you're slower moving through it or something like that. They've definitely hinted at some level of complexity to the use of terrain, which is, you know, always a good thing. I love 8th edition. You know, I've played 40k for as long as I can remember, and, you know, I've got every rule book since 2nd edition, I believe. 3rd edition, actually, is the first rule book I bought. So, you know, for me, it's just one of those things where it's, you know, it's just another change, and going to a little bit more complexity, you know, isn't going to be unmanageable, I don't think. 40k is, you know, a very playable, accessible game now, with a lot of tactical depth, but there's no harm in adding a new angle to that. And I think Games Workshop, you know, they've learned a lot from 8th edition, and I think if they add tactical depth, it'll still be very playable and very easy and smooth to use. That's what we would hope from modern day 40k. You know, gone are the days of clunky old editions, where play starts and stops continuously whilst you're checking different charts and things. That's just all gone now. Now, the next sort of thing, and I'll just touch on this, flyers. You know, they're more flexible, they can fly off the board, they've just made them more realistic, and that's really cool. But what I thought was cool was they actually hinted at this 2 or 3 times. When they mentioned the terrain thing, they said they wanted to, and the reserves idea, they at both occasions said that they were trying to make combat more modern and realistic, instead of sort of Napoleonic style where you just line up 2 armies face to face and mash them against each other. And again, they said this with flyers. Now, I think this is great if you read between the lines, because, you know, me and my brother, Mordian Glory, if you've not checked out his channel, and if you're a Guard player or a Genestealer Cult player, we've got Black Templars, definitely go check out Mordian Glory, and I'll leave a link in the description below. But we always swear by the idea that you should play to your codex. You know, you should actually play to the fluff of your codex. You know, Blood Angels are shock troops, and if you play as shock troops, that's the way to go. Imperial Guard, masses of infantry with tanks rolling behind, crushing all, you know, hope of the enemy, and, you know, that's the way you should play them. And, you know, if they're going down that route, then, you know, we have a very flavorful army that goes back to, you know, Space Hulk, before 40k was even a thing. Blood Angels were a thing, you know, versus Tyranid Genestealers. So, you know, we've got so much flavour historically in Games Workshop perspective, and it's something that they really hold up and value at the moment. And I think that also leans into our gameplay. And, you know, as a Blood Angels player, you really feel the way you should be playing Blood Angels is the right way to play it. You know, when you get one of those assaults off and just wipe out a flank, just literally crush it, you know, and you get a textbook charge off or something like that, you know it. You know, there's a very distinct way of playing Blood Angels that feels good. And that's always been, you know, parallel with the lore for Blood Angels. And the fact that they're going further down this route with games with 40k 9th edition as a whole can only be a good thing for us as such a distinct chapter. That is, I hope, reflected in the rules, and can only make us more powerful if that's the world that Blood Angels are going to exist in now. Now, another sort of interesting thing that I'll just touch on is the idea of blast weapons. So they've dabbled in taking blast templates out entirely, and I don't think they're going to bring blast templates back necessarily, but they've said something about blast weapons. Now, for me, well, I think they may have said template weapons, thinking about it, or I've sort of they've used the terms interchangeably. I've written down in my note blast weapons. And the fact they want to make certain weapons that should be good against infantry but aren't in 8th edition, and it's unrealistic. They want to make that not the way, make that change, that if a knight with a rapid fire battle cannon rakes into an infantry formation, limbs are going to go flying, red mist everywhere. It should be as good as a rapid fire assault cannon, if not better. And they want to reflect that in the rules. And I think they're going to probably stick with their current thing, but just give a different weapon profile against infantry versus vehicles with this blast keyword or something like that. But, it would be really interesting if that actually carried over to flamers, because if you remember from 7th edition and previous editions, flamers were a template weapon and kind of fell into the same category as explosives in that they were an area of effect weapon. And I can't help but feel that that's probably going to be reflected in the rules, because remember, they've said they want things more realistic and that kind of thing. And currently, flamers don't ignore cover. They're random amount of splash and all that kind of thing. They do auto hit, and that's cool, but it's not necessarily mega realistic. So with that in mind, why does this affect the Blood Angels? Well, we have our Bals, we have our Flamestorm cannons. I think everyone can agree, for the entirety of 8th edition, Flamestorm cannons on Bal Predators have been just dire. They have been poor, and that's a shame, because they are really cool. And the same for the Land Raider that can take Flamestorm cannons as well. That is a cool vehicle with a big carrying capacity, and it's dangerous if you want to get close. And if you combine the idea that you can't tie up a vehicle with infantry, if you've got Flamestorm cannons, if you've got a vehicle that can spew out flame and fire whilst it's locked up by infantry, that is a ball of destruction that you don't want to go anywhere near. So, really having a Bal maybe with flamers on the sides, an assault cannon on top, or heavy bolts on the sides and a Flamestorm on top is going to be some amazing combo that we can look forward to. Something I'm really getting excited about. And again, we don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but with the way, sort of taking the overall pitch of 9th edition that Games Workshop have done to us, and remember that it is what it is. It is a pitch to us, the collectors. They want to get us excited, and they're hopeful that we will buy into this. And, with that pitch, they've been very clear that they want this realism, they want this cool effect, they want these cinematics. They've released a cinematic trailer alongside, or in preparation for 9th edition. And, from all of that, surely having a tank with flamethrowers attached to it is going to tear through enemy infantry hordes just without them being able to do anything about it beyond blow up the tank with anti-tank fire. So, it's going to be really, really interesting. And, there's a lot of things to get really excited about. I think you guys know that I love Bals, and my regular viewers know that I love Bals, but they're not that good. They're mediocre at the best of times. They can be a real heartbreaking unit that let you down, and it would be really, really nice if we can use them. So the final sort of thing that really got me excited was the sort of narrative side of things. Now, I am essentially through and through a competitive player, but I also have this inability to sort of collect an army that's going to just cheese and wreck people. I like to be competitive within the theme of the army, if that makes sense, which is why I've always been Blood Angels and why I've sort of never really left them on the competitive scene, I guess, on a subconscious level, is because I can really play as a Blood Angel and rip people apart and be competitive doing it. So, with that in mind, I do still love narrative. And me and my brother, Mordy and Gloria, my friends, my general gaming circle, we never use a narrative rule set, but we always have some kind of idea when we're chatting, as we're setting up our models and that kind of thing, about what is the story, why are our armies fighting. And I think that's certainly something that most players do, whether for whatever sort of your take on competitive or narrative play. You've always got that, part of 40k. It's not just, you may as well be playing chess if you're just moving things around to a strict set of rules, and chess is the most balanced competitive game. We love 40k, we love our armies, we love the connection we feel to our armies and the sort of visuals that we get in our brains when we're using them on the battlefield, and when your Smash Captain wrecks an enemy hero or something that's been causing you trouble or holding up a flank, on his own or something like that. You know, you see it. You know, you see him smite him to the ground in the name of Sanguinius, and you know, prove himself the best, the greatest champion on the field, and it's awesome. And being able to sort of, what they said is they've tried to tie a narrative element into a sort of standardized scale, and they've sort of done this on two ways. One where you can have almost a developing army where you guys pick up injuries, which is really cool. If you've ever played the video game Mordheim, which is a really addictive, if not clunky video game, but it's really, really well done if you get through the insane difficulty curve. You know, carrying injuries through, getting connected to your guys, you know, the idea of having a captain who gets felled one too many times, but you bring him back in a dreadnought. When you play, you know, we've all got those regular opponents who we play against all the time, and we've all got time to sort of have a narrative running on one side. So I'm sure, you know, one of my, you know, best friends and regular competitors is Sam, and he plays on the channel with us all the time, and you've seen his Iron Hands, you know, on multiple occasions on battle reports. And, you know, it'll be really cool. We'll still play competitive stuff. We'll still prepare for tournaments and try ridiculous lists out against each other, and, you know, crack out the night. We've got 2 night armies, or I've got 2 night armies, and, you know, we test our armies and our latest lists against the knights and that kind of thing. You know, we'll still have all that fun. But on the side, we might just say, oh, do you fancy continuing the narrative campaign? And we'll crack out our narrative list, and that will just be something we pick up from time to time. I just think it's cool to have a sort of standardized set of rules that allows, you know, us competitively natured players who still have a real passion for the 40k lore to sort of imbue our games with that. I just think it's really clever, and I'm really excited to get involved and try that out. And, you know, you can be certain there's going to be reams of content on this channel, Schola Progenium, and on Mordian Glory channel, as me and my brother really go to town with some cool narrative development campaigns, you know, with that competitive edge that we can't help but bring with us. Now, the other side of this was the fact that they were going to have different scaled games. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I love a smaller game. The sort of pleasure of using reduced resources where you can't have all of your toys, all of the tricks in your bag, but again, your opponent has had to pick what they want to bring to the battle as well. They haven't got 2,000 points. They can't bring a bit of everything or really mash into one thing. You know, they've got 750, 800, 1,000 points, 500 points, depending on, you know, what you feel like on the day. But a cheeky pickup game on a smaller scale is always really fun, but the problem is they're not always balanced. You kind of have to agree beforehand the level of ridiculous cheese you are willing to put up with. For example, me and my friends, sort of our general gaming circle, we will play probably, you know, when we get opportunity, people have got kids and, you know, we've all got, you know, jobs and wives and that kind of thing. When we get the chance, probably every 4 to 6 weeks, we'll have an afternoon where we all bring a sort of small 500 to 750 point army, and we all sort of match up randomly and just settle old grudges and that kind of thing, and keep a tally of, you know, on a casual level, who's won the most games throughout the day. You usually get, you know, 3 or 4 quick games in, and they're really fun, but they're not always balanced. You know, if someone decides, you know, at 800 points, you know, I can feasibly bring, and did for a laugh once, but with another army, and just said, does anyone want to face this, because it's a total cheesy joke. But, you know, you can take a Dominus Knight, the Valiant Knight with a flamethrower, and, you know, 32 guardsmen in 800 points, essentially. I can't remember exactly how I did it, but that was essentially what I did. And I still had loads of, you know, plenty of command points to mess around with as well. And it was just that list at 800 points is, you know, ridiculous unless you tailor your army to face it. Because if someone goes all heavy, and you know, you don't really have the points to spend on the special weapons to take something like that down. So I think the fact that they're going to have standardized different scales of games is, again, really exciting, really fun idea, which has got just so much potential. You know, having certain restrictions and certain balances on smaller points games can make sure that, you know, you can just have a quick pickup game after work. You know, we're all tired, lead busy lives. You know, maybe you've got school, maybe you've got work, university, who knows, you know, your family, whatever. But sometimes we fancy a game, but we just don't have the energy or the time because of our responsibilities to play a 2,000 point game, to meet up at, you know, a gaming club, arrange it online, you know, have the risk of, you know, someone letting you down, or, you know, all of that, we've all been through it. But it's way easier, and you can sort of almost get yourself more motivated if you've got this standardized set of rules, so you know you're not going to be wasting an hour of your night. But you can just, you know, go to the gaming club on your way home after work, or nip around someone's house or anything like that, and just have that quick game and be home in time for dinner, and, you know, still know that it's going to be a cool, balanced game. And there's, you know, I'm sure going to be tournaments and all. Back in, you know, 7th edition and certainly 6th and 5th edition, you know, a lot of local tournaments in local gaming shops just ran like little 750,000 point tournaments, and, you know, they seem to work a lot better than they do in 8th edition. Or, you know, it's just something that I don't see as much anymore. Maybe it's been moved away from just because of the scale of 8th edition, but it would really excite me to see those come back. You know, I won more than a few models and sort of gift certificate cards on the local tournament scene around the Northwest, you know, a few years ago with a few of my buddies, you know, just playing small games. And, you know, it's, you know, not for anything more than that. And it was just really, really fun. So again, that's something that I'm really, really excited about. And I think for Blood Angels, from a Blood Angels perspective, it's very interesting because we can really struggle as an elite army at those low points levels. And I have no doubt that the checks and balances will benefit us more than they would, say, you know, the more swingy armies that, you know, with the Blood Angels, you know, you're going to have some troops and some elites and they're coming in to hack you apart. But with 750 points, you can take 150 infantry guardsmen, or, you know, a knight with a backup unit or something like that. So having those checks and balances means us as an elite army, where we don't have that many points to play with, and we can't always take on the really swingy, broken, cheesy lists that can be brought at that points level. You know, that's going to give us more of a chance at that level, which is, you know, from a Blood Angels perspective, really exciting. Now, the final thing, just to mention, is that they're bringing out new Blood Angels lore. They mentioned that there's going to be a new book series, and they mentioned specifically that they'll be covering Dante's antics and, you know, just covering the Blood Angels with some exciting lore. So that should be really cool if you're into reading the 40k Games Workshop Black Library books. So, you know, all in all, I think we can come away from this pretty excited. You know, our purist specialist chapter is going to be rewarded for our loyalty, for staying purist. The firing from combat with tanks isn't going to be a massive issue to us because we can smash tanks in one round if we're going for them, and opens up a whole host of exciting potential for our own quirky tanks that the Baal Predator doesn't really operate like a normal tank and likes to get up close, so that's going to be really beneficial for us. The train changes are something that really watch this space. We don't know what's going to happen, but probably we can be excited about it, and it's going to have some level of tactical depth. You know, blast weapons and flamers, you know, potentially watch this space. We again don't know how that's going to be, but should hopefully be more realistic and more fun to use, and more impressive and deadly on the tabletop. And again, that can affect us, not necessarily with the artillery that we bring, but with our specialist tanks and flamers. And, you know, again, finally, that the different scales of standardization open up a whole host of new competitive and fun options for all players. And just if you're passionate and excited about 40k, then now is the time to be getting involved. So, you know, thanks very much to you guys out there who have listened all the way through this. Thanks for my regular listeners who always comment. You know, I really love the fact that you guys comment and always communicate with me, and always have time for each other and give advice if I'm not there to comment because I'm at work or something like that. You know, I really love that. And, you know, this video goes out to you guys, and I hope that, you know, I haven't kept you waiting too long and you're angry with me. The final thing I would say, you know, is more of a question before I sign off, and that is, you know, with my channel, you know, I often mention on the sidelines my other armies, the other forces that I collect, and, you know, I have a big passion for 40k as a whole, but I know that basically all of my subscriber base, or all of my subscriber base, are Blood Angels players, because that's the videos that I support, because that's the army that I'm best with and most passionate about and have played since I was a little kid. But I chose the channel name Schola Progenium for a reason. That was because I didn't want to sideline myself just into Blood Angels. And when I got things off the ground, I wanted to be able to do videos about all kinds of armies. My passion is giving real tactics that work with armies that I use with competitive lists on some occasion, but also on fun lists as well, to sort of try out units that you might not necessarily use. But I love giving those tactics from a real world experience. And, you know, I've got more to give in terms of other forces, but I don't want to, you know, start churning out those videos and let down my Blood Angels players. So I was really interested to know what other armies my subscribers collect as well as Blood Angels. You know, do you collect Drukhari? Do you collect Imperial Knights? You know, do you collect Deathwatch? What have we got out there? You know, I've got plenty. Between me and my brother, we have more armies than you can wave a stick at, wave a chainsaw at, you might say. So, you know, I'm really eager to start producing content, real tactics that really work on the tabletop for all these other armies. I've got so many exciting things that I discover, and I always think, oh, I'd love to put that on the channel when I come up with something new. But, you know, I don't want to sort of water down the Blood Angels content. So I was just wondering what you guys thought. Would you be excited for content for other forces? And if so, what forces would interest you? So I'd just really be interested to find that out. So once again, I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to this video. I hope you found it interesting. I hope you found it exciting, and, you know, you're as pumped up for 9th edition as I am. This has been the Schola Progenium. Thank you very much for your time. Goodbye.